Hi, my name is Ian Nugent. The first thing I want to say is that this is a first for me. I've not done a video relating to political issues. I have not actually posted very much on my social media outlets concerning political issues. It's just not something that I do. However, I do believe that these midterm elections compel me to say something. And specifically what I like to say is to minority groups, to African Americans, to Hispanic Americans, and to Muslim Americans, minorities in general, but specifically to these three groups. I like to say to you, please, please, be careful what you say on November 6th. I don't believe you or I have a choice. We will say something on November 6th, but I'm asking you to please be careful what you say on November 6th. 2018. Because sometimes in a democracy, non-votes speak just as loudly or even louder than votes. And I believe these midterms are such an instance where if we do not vote, we will say something even louder than if we did vote. These elections are the first opportunity for both political parties to see what electoral consequence, if any, our President Donald Trump's rhetoric concerning minorities will have. His rhetoric, his words, his actions concerning minorities have inspired memes, they've inspired marches, they've inspired viral bursts of rage on social media, and that's all well and good. But the question is still out there. Will his rhetoric, will his words, will his actions inspire votes? His actions, perhaps motivated at best by ignorance or even at worst, perhaps motivated by malevolence, they have done a lot in this society. But can they motivate minorities specifically to vote? Minorities in any context are at higher risks of suspicion, at higher risk of negative stereotypes, at higher risk of marginalization. This is just a part of human society. Those minorities, whether they be Christians in Egypt or Arabs in Mexico or Buddhists in South Korea or Chinese in Jamaica or if they're white in South Africa, all minorities are at a higher risk of suspicion, of negative stereotypes, and of marginalization. And this is without any other factors at play. It's just the nature of minority-majority relationships in human societies. But in this nation, there are other factors at play. In this nation, we've had historical factors that have caused increased risk of suspicion, increased risk of negative stereotypes, and increased risk of marginalizations by particularly those three minority groups that I've identified here. And now additionally, we've had a presidential candidate, and now a president who has urged on and encouraged negative stereotypes, has urged on and encouraged suspicion of these minority groups, and is even encouraged in some instances marginalizations of these minority groups. Take, for example, what now President Trump, when he was a candidate Trump in 2015 and in 2016 said about Islam.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
Do you think Islam is at war with the West?
I think Islam hates us. There's something there that there's a tremendous hatred there. There's a tremendous hatred. We have to get to the bottom of it.
I guess the question is there a war between the West and radical Islam, or is there a war between the West and Islam
itself?
It's
radical, but it's very hard to define. It's very hard to separate because you don't know who's who.
Please notice the universality of the claims. He says he wants a ban on all Muslims from entering into the U.S. He says that all of Islam hates us. Given an opportunity to clarify if he means just radical Islam or all Islam, he refuses to clarify, leaving it out there that all Islam, that is all Muslims, hate the United States. With such statements, it's a justification for those who would be suspicious of Muslims. It's a justification for those who hold negative stereotypes towards Muslims. It's even a justification for those who would commit hate crimes against Muslims because, of course, we are at war with all of Islam and not just radical fringe elements of the religion. I want to take a look at the statistics here on the screen. Now, quickly, I want to say I am not saying that these statements that I've just played from Donald Trump caused the 2015 and 2016 numbers. Indeed, the statements were from the end of 2015 and the beginning of 2016, so they definitely were not the cause of the 2015 results. However, notice the 2009 results are not available, and as of this recording, the recording of this video, 2017 was not yet available. But the numbers hover between 130 and 160 consistently for those earlier years. But then there's almost a double in the incidence of hate crimes against Muslims in 2015, and indeed they do double in 2016. Again, I'm not saying that Donald Trump caused this, but in an environment where this is the case, such words from a well-respected individual, an individual who is successful by most standards, an individual who is intelligent, who many people follow, such statements are very, very dangerous, justifying hate crime because, of course, we are at war with them. However, unfortunately, Donald Trump does not reserve his encouragement of suspicion, his encouragement or perpetuation of negative stereotypes for the Muslim community alone. Take a look at this image. This image was tweeted by a candidate for the presidency of the United States. In November of 2015, Donald Trump tweeted this image of what is apparently a black man pointing a gun, looking very violent, looking very criminal, and then putting these statistics on the I'm putting these statistics that he listed on the screen here. That 81% of whites are killed by blacks. These statistics are completely false. There is not a true statistic on the screen. And not only are they not true, they are grossly misstated. Indeed, the whites that are killed by blacks statistic is 5 times the number of whites that were killed by blacks in that year. The source of the statistics is bogus. The statistics themselves are bogus. Indeed, consistently throughout recent history and throughout history in America, whites kill whites at a much higher rate than blacks kill whites. But Donald Trump posted this, which of course would encourage suspicion of African Americans, which would of course perpetuate negative stereotypes of African Americans. Take a look on the screen again here. This is a Wikipedia article. I didn't write it. Take a look at it if you have the time, talking about the consistent stereotype of increase or overcriminality, particularly of the black male. It's probably not a coincidence that there was a black male in that tweet that Donald Trump made. One of the saddest consequences of the criminal stereotype of African Americans has been the disproportionate incarceration of African Americans. And in this area, Donald Trump has not just spoken, not just tweeted, he's actually been able to implement concrete actions that have affected this community. And not just African Americans, but minorities in general. And in this case, you don't need to take my word for it. I want you to take a look at this article. If you have time, I wish you would read the entire thing. It's not written by me. It's not written by a left-wing extremist. It's not been written by a Democrat. It's written by Rand Paul, a Republican, who is concerned about the impacts of policies that were implemented just months after Donald Trump's inauguration. In this article, you can see it right there for yourself, Rand Paul is warning that mandatory minimum sentences have unfairly and disproportionately incarcerated a generation of minorities. Seeing that word there, minorities, that's who he's talking about when he begins the sentence and says that this will impact the lives of millions of Americans. Rand Paul, a Republican, is concerned here. He goes on to state later that the war on drugs started in the late 70s, the early 70s, but really picked up in the 80s and beyond that. That war on drugs has disproportionately affected young black males. Rand Paul is concerned. Rand Paul thinks this is something that will negatively impact minorities. But do we care? Do minorities care? And do we care enough to go beyond marching, go beyond memes, go beyond social media outbursts? Do we care enough to vote? Again, Donald Trump's words, his actions have not just been reserved to the Muslim American community, have not just been reserved to the African American community. Also, the Hispanic American community has been impacted by his words. You may remember he had this to say of a judge, an American-born judge of Mexican descent.
This judge is giving us unfair rulings. Now I say why. Well, I'm building a wall, okay? And it's a wall between Mexico, not another country.
But he's not from Mexico.
In my opinion,
he's from Indiana.
He's Mexican heritage, and he's very proud of it.
Here again, you don't have to accept my interpretation of these comments. I want you to hear what a prominent member of Donald Trump's own party, the Republican Party, Paul Ryan, had to say in interpreting these comments.
Claiming a person can't do their job because of their race is sort of like the textbook definition of a racist comment. I think that should be absolutely disavowed. It's absolutely unacceptable. But do I believe that Hillary Clinton is the answer? No, I do not. Do I believe that Hillary Clinton is going to be the answer to solving these problems? I do not. I believe that we have more common ground on the policy issues of the day, and we have more likelihood of getting our policies enacted with him than we do with her. But I do absolutely disavow those comments. I think they're wrong. I don't think they're right-headed. And the thinking behind it is something I don't even personally relate to. But at the end of the day, this is about ideas. This is about moving our agenda forward, and that's why we're moving the way we're moving. Manny.
Paul Ryan's interpretation of these comments is that they are a textbook definition of racism. But I want you to notice something else that Paul Ryan says there. He says that these comments are a textbook example of racism, but then he goes on to say that this does not compromise his policy. This does not in any way compromise his agenda that he's trying to accomplish. What that says is that there's a divide, that Paul Ryan's agenda and Paul Ryan's policies are mutually exclusive to the issues of racism. Paul Ryan's agenda does not include eliminating racism in this country. Paul Ryan's agenda does not include the reduction of suspicion of minorities, the reduction of negative stereotyping of minority. Paul Ryan's agenda can still be accomplished even though the candidate for presidency can make textbook examples of racism. Allow me to use another example. Do you believe that if Donald Trump had given a comment that were a textbook example of advocating for polygamy, do you believe that Paul Ryan could have said the same thing, that that won't compromise my policies and my agenda? No, he couldn't say that because a part of the Republican platform is the protection of the traditional marriage and the family. He could not separate those two because that is part and parcel of his agenda. But Paul Ryan is able to say that his agenda, his policies are separate from issues of racism, issues that affect in real ways minority communities. Quickly, I want to say, I do not believe, nor have I ever believed, that Paul Ryan is a racist. I do not believe that Paul Ryan even wants to advocate for policies and positions that exclude issues of racism. I will go so far as to say, I believe that Paul Ryan wishes that he could advocate for positions that are in favor of minorities. I believe that Paul Ryan, like Rand Paul and many other good Republicans, wishes that they would be able to push for policies and their agendas that include things that make America fair for all Americans. However, Paul Ryan, like every other real good politician, understands only one language: votes. Votes. I believe Paul Ryan wished that the minorities in the Republican Party had gone to the polls during the primaries of 2015 and 2016, during the primaries of 2016, and had said no to Donald Trump's rhetoric, no to Donald Trump's words and tweets, and said, no, we will not stand for this. But unfortunately, because there were not enough minorities, unfortunately, because there were not enough people pushing back on that rhetoric, Paul Ryan had to acquiesce to Donald Trump. I do not believe, and I believe that everyone would have to agree with me, that Paul Ryan wishes there were another presidential candidate other than Donald Trump, but unfortunately he can only listen to one language: votes. And he did not have the votes to include minority concerns in his agenda. If he had the votes, I am confident that he would be able to embrace, as I believe he wants to in his heart, minority concerns in his agenda and in his policy. How do I know they'll listen? It's not just that I'm making this up and saying that I believe Paul Ryan's a good guy. I know he will listen because I have this document as proof. This document is referred to as the GOP autopsy report. It's a report that came out after the GOP lost the 2012 election, where Paul Ryan himself was a candidate. It's a report that came out saying all of the problems that were diagnosed with the GOP's outreach and their campaigning in the 2012 election. And a part of this, I want you to take a look at what they have in here. Take a look at this section under African Americans. Notice under number 3 for the recommendations, establish a presence in African American communities and at black organizations such as the NAACP. They got it. They heard the message from the votes in 2012 rejecting the Republican Party, and as a result of it, they said we need to change. We need to make more inroads, greater outreach into the African American community, more inroads and more outreach into the Hispanic American community, because that's what we heard from the voters. But in 2016, they heard something different. Because Donald Trump was able to win without reaching out to minorities, without reaching out to African Americans, and even insulting African Americans, insulting Hispanic Americans, because he was able to win with that, now they heard a different message. And maybe, like Paul Ryan says, we don't need to include them in our policies. We don't need to include them in our agenda. Indeed, we don't have a choice but to exclude them, because the voters that spoke to us did not care about their interests. They didn't care about an individual who could speak textbook examples of racism. And so after the election, we see it's in the opposite direction, not reaching out to the NAACP. Donald Trump becomes the first sitting president since Ronald Reagan to not address the NAACP, the nation's oldest, longest serving organization serving the African American community. This is what the Republican Party heard in 2016, and now their next opportunity to hear from voters is 2018. Will they hear the same thing they heard in 2016? Can they safely ignore minority interests and minority concerns and still win? Can they safely ignore the concerns that we have and still have success at the polls? That's the question that they're asking. And it's not only Republicans. Even Democrats need to understand and need to see what will be the consequence of this. Do we need to adjust our posture any and be more concerned about issues that affect these minority communities than we have been in the past? And not to discredit them, they've done a great work and I thank them for it. But even they could do more in pushing for legislation that will help the Hispanic community, help the Muslim community, help the African American community. And if they hear from us in these elections that it's not that important, then they too will understand from us that maybe we don't need to have such a prominent place in their party's platform. What I'm asking from you very, very clearly, very directly, is that you please, I'm appealing to you, please vote. Please vote in these midterm elections. And I'm not asking you to vote Democrat. I'm actually not asking that. I'm asking you to vote specifically for any candidate who has a proven record of holding Donald Trump accountable. And not just lip service, not just saying, oh, he's a racist, making racist comments, but we can still accomplish our agenda. I'm saying candidates who have a proven record of holding him accountable. I want to say this just so people understand, don't get me wrong here. Right here in Maryland where I live, Governor Larry Hogan, there's a black man who's running against him for governor of my state. I'm not saying that all black people need to vote for the black guy. I'm not saying that all Hispanics need to vote for the black guy. I'm not saying you need to vote for the Democrat. If you believe that Larry Hogan is able to advance the agenda that you believe is most helpful, I think that's a safe vote. Why? Because I believe Larry Hogan has a demonstrated record of holding Donald Trump accountable. I'm not endorsing him. I'm not saying to vote for him over the other. What I'm saying, though, is that if you're in a district, if you're in a region, a state, where you believe that the candidate that can best represent your interests and has held Donald Trump accountable is a Republican, fine, vote Republican. I do believe that our interests can be best served if the House is taken by Democrats. I believe even if, with a hope and a prayer, that if the Senate can be taken by Democrats, that would be great as well. But I'm not saying that you need to vote Democrat. I'm saying vote against Donald Trump. Vote to express a rejection of Donald Trump's ignoring, and not only ignoring, but even assailing of minority communities. This is what I'm asking. This is what I'm appealing to you to do. And I hope that this video has been persuasive.